Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here on this Wednesday. Didn't get an episode out yesterday. Life just happened and I got behind, but we're going to catch up now. And then later today, most likely, I'm going to have a second episode for today's testimony. Before we get started, you know what to do if you're on YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Music fact of the day. How long was the Bare Naked Lady song 1 week on the Billboard Top 100 charts? They were on there for 1 week. Also, that song was improvised and written in 3.5 minutes. Yesterday morning in testimony, we started off with the medical examiner, Dr. Heather Jarrell. She is the chief medical examiner, and she performed the autopsy on Ms. Hutchins that took place on October 22nd of 2021. She ruled the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the chest, the manner of death, accident. And the reason she classified her death as an accident is because there was no intent to cause death. She said other medical examiners may have classified this as a homicide. And she mentions there was another movie shooting death that was classified as an accident. She's likely talking about Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow. She did a CT of Ms. Hutchins' body. Ultimately, she was healthy. There was no retained projectile, obviously, because that exited and then hit the director. Ms. Hutchins was wrapped in a hospital blanket when she was brought in. Also with her was a jacket, a pair of tights, and her pants. They show a photo of the jacket. I'm not going to put it up on screen. It was just covered in blood. And they look for defects in clothing that correspond to entry wounds. There was no gunshot residue, no soot or stippling, which means this was a distant wound. It was not point blank. She had 2 wounds. The entrance was in the right armpit area, and then it exited on her back just below her left shoulder blade. They show photos to the jury before she was cleaned. When people come in for autopsy and it's an investigation, they'll take a photo of the bag before they unzip it, as they unzip the bag, and throughout the autopsy just to document the whole process. The entrance in the armpit area missed the major vessels in the shoulder area and in her arm. It entered into the right aspect of her chest, traveled through the chest cavity. It damaged blood vessels along the ribs. It actually broke one rib. The projectile entered into the right lung, traveled through the spinal cord, and then traveled through soft tissue of the back before exiting. The medical examiner used a trajectory rod to show the pathway of the projectile, and the trajectory on that was front to back, right to left, and then downward. When Ms. Hutchins arrived at the hospital, she had over 1 liter of blood in her chest cavity. That is significant blood loss, and the injury to her right lung was lethal. Toxicology, negative for alcohol and drugs. On cross, the defense brought up some things that were surprising to hear. The time of the incident was at 1:48, according to the medical examiner. She didn't arrive to the hospital until 3:20, which is about an hour and a half. We know the helicopter was waiting there. We saw it in the body cam footage. He asked the medical examiner if she knew why there was such a delay in getting her to the hospital. She does not. Now, I talked to 2 surgeons yesterday because some of the information here, I wanted to get their take on it. And one of the things I asked is there any reason when you have a gunshot wound victim that it takes an hour and a half to get them to the hospital? Of course, they don't know what time the helicopter landed. And that's something I'm curious to know, is how long between when that life flight landed, did they actually get her on and out? When somebody has a traumatic injury like a gunshot wound, you do the basics to stabilize, such as establish an airway, maybe start fluids, but you get them on that flight. They have to be in a trauma bay. And they call it the golden hour after a wound like that, where you have a very precious amount of time, if the person's still alive, to intervene medically to possibly save their life. The defense talks about prior medical intervention before arriving at the hospital. Ms. Hutchins had been intubated, and get this, the tube was in the wrong place. It was in her esophagus and not her airway. It was pointless. It was not doing her any good. What did they do? They re-intubated at the hospital, and again, it goes into the esophagus. The physicians that I talked to yesterday, a trauma surgeon and an anesthesiologist, both said there were a few things they could have done to ensure that the intubation was correct. They could have looked for her chest to rise and fall. They could have listened for breath sounds. Also, They could have checked carbon dioxide levels, but who knows how long. She was intubated incorrectly. And of course, when your brain doesn't get oxygen, you know what happens. After she was in the hospital and reintubated incorrectly, they opened the chest cavity on both sides and then opened that protective covering surrounding the heart to massage her heart to see if they could resuscitate her. When she arrived, she was pulseless, non-responsive, and not breathing. The defense points out that having that intubation tube in the wrong place can be dangerous. The medical examiner said it's just an ineffective way to resuscitate. The defense says that Ms. Hutchins was complaining of shortness of breath, and due to the fact that that tube was in the wrong place, it would not have helped relieve that in her. He asked about a chest needle. They tried to put in a central line to get fluids in the most effective way. They tried to get blood products into her heart, and so that central line was placed in her heart. The medical examiner doesn't know offhand who intubated her or who did CPR. The defense asked the medical examiner, had she gotten timely medical intervention, could she have survived? And the medical examiner was very hesitant to answer this. She said, I don't treat these injuries. I'm a medical examiner. But the defense points out in an earlier statement she gave to them, she did say that it is possible Ms. Hutchins could have survived had she gotten more timely intervention. Her being intubated incorrectly, it just adds to the cluster of the entire situation. It's just so sad. All of it, y'all. The next witness was Stephen Orr. He's with the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office. He looked at the rifle that they had trouble clearing. It was that lever rifle. It had a cartridge that was jammed. The cartridge was the wrong size. Sergeant Zook, who testified the day before, tried to clear the round. The wrong caliber wouldn't chamber into the rifle, so therefore it couldn't be ejected. He points out this was not Sergeant Zook's fault. The wrong cartridge would cause the jam. On cross, he doesn't know if the round was a dummy or a blank round that got jammed inside. The defense attorney asked if Zook didn't properly unload the gun, and he said he doesn't know. He wasn't there when he did. But on redirect, the prosecution points out if Sergeant Zook tried to unload the gun the way you demonstrated, is that wrong? He said no, it's the correct way. The incorrect round loaded in that chamber caused that jam. The next witness was Byron French. He works at the FBI. He is a computer forensics dude, so he works with cell phone extractions. He extracted data from Hannah's cell phone. They go through some text messages. I believe Becca worked on set because in an interview that Hannah gave after the shooting, she mentions a Becca. So let's go through these text messages. The first one is October 23rd, 2021 at 12:28 p.m. Hannah texts Becca, hey, I might be coming to Albuquerque tonight, and I was wondering if I can get that stuff. At 5:09, Hannah again texts Becca, Becca, call me when you get a chance. Then she texts someone else named Courtney the same day. Hey, do you have Becca's number? Then at 6:20, she texts, he gets in 30 minutes or so. Becca hasn't texted me back at all. I'm trying to get my things from her tomorrow. Courtney responds, okay. Then at 6:25 p.m., Hannah texts Courtney, okay, let me know if you hear from her at all. Thanks for checking on me again. Miss you already. On October 24th, the next day after she tries to text Becca, she texts Becca with a question mark. Becca responds at 11:33 a.m. She says, hey, I'm in Hamas working on Big Sky Splinter until. Then Becca asks Hannah at 11:51, how are you doing, lady? On November 7th, Hannah texts Becca, hey, I'm coming to Albuquerque tomorrow, going to be there for a week or so. On November 8th, Becca texts Hannah, I'm in Roswell working on Barron and Toluca. November 10th, 10:37 p.m., Hannah texts Becca, is that far? Bummer. I wanted to see you. Then on November 13th of 2021 at 7:02 p.m., Hannah texts Courtney, could Becca maybe drop off my things to y'all since I haven't been able to catch her? Courtney texts back at 6:49 p.m. I asked her to. Hopefully she will. Then we move back to Hannah and Becca on November 22nd of 2021. It says, hey, Becca, mind if my brother-in-law picks up my things from you after Thanksgiving? He lives in Albuquerque. On cross, the defense asked if he looked at Sarah, Zachary, and Dave Hall's phones. He did. The defense attorney says that the witness bookmarked very little that he extracted from their phones and says you don't know the significance of what you bookmark and whether it pertains to the shooting. He says he does what he's asked to do in the request form. She asked if he remembers in his pretrial interview, which was November 29th of last year, you were asked if any of the items had significance from Dave Hall's phone regarding the shooting. Answering, I don't. I just bookmarked it for the case agent. That way she can make the determination. The witness goes on to say it's not his job to determine significance. And the defense attorney says exactly. He finds what is asked of him on the request form and then leaves everything else to the case agent. He's asked if he had any text messages between Sarah Zachary and Seth Kinney prior to the day of the shooting, October 21st. He doesn't remember. This is a new defense attorney that's up, by the way, and asked if he reviewed his report prior to coming in to testify. He said there are multiple reports and he can't commit every one to memory. The state asked for a sidebar and the witness kind of just shakes his head. He doesn't remember any text messages between Sarah and Seth Kinney before the day of the shooting. He doesn't think he was asked to examine Seth Kinney or Alec Baldwin's phone. They ask if it's unusual to him in a shooting case not to be asked to look at the shooter's phone right away. And he said not always. His work was limited to what Detective Hancock specifically asked him to do. On a redirect, the state asked the witness if he's aware that Alec Baldwin submitted his phone to be extracted in New York. He said yes. The next witness was a man who works in forensic science services. He primarily reconstructs shooting distances, ricochet bullets, how close the gun was when it was discharged. His testimony was long and very technical. He came on the case in March of last year, and in July of last year, he retrieved evidence from the case. He got the revolver that was used from the FBI after it was broken in that mallet testing. He shows photos as the gun was received to the FBI intact and in various cocked positions. He shows the jury with the hammer fully engaged what it looks like. He explains how to remove cartridges. He didn't find any evidence that the hammer notch was filed or modified, which would have enabled faster shooting. He shows photos of putting the broken pieces of that gun back together. He says the projectile that hit Miss Hutchins and Joel had a lot of impact damage from striking the bone. They show a video filmed in August of last year where they had replaced the broken parts on the revolver and they were demonstrating it at that point. The next witness is Detective Hancock. She is a corporal with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. When they got word about the shooting on the set, they met as a team and started to split up assignments. She was designated as primary about 2 weeks after the shooting happened. On the day of the shooting, she took Hannah, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin back to the station to interview them. The three of those, they point out, were the ones criminally charged in this case. They were also interviews being conducted on set in a trailer. She said they only have one interview room at the sheriff's office, and it was just challenging to interview everybody due to the number of witnesses on scene versus the number of staff they had to work with. She did a subsequent interview with Hannah and her attorney, and then she had numerous subsequent telephone conversations with Mr. Baldwin. Sarah Zachary's initial interview was there on set in that trailer, but the witness interviewed Sarah again with her attorney. She also interviewed Jensen Ackles. She said she interviewed Seth Kinney over 5 times. She also interviewed Thel Reed, which is Hannah's father, over the phone. Hannah's attorney, Mr. Bowles, brought Hannah's dad up to the witness during Hannah's second interview. Her dad wanted to provide a statement about where the live ammo on site came from. His attorney gave the witness a typed statement. She said that was not a sufficient statement for her because she had not conducted that interview herself and the statement wasn't signed or verified. She told Hannah's attorney that they could set up an interview, and they did. That interview was about a week before they performed the search warrant at the prop warehouse. Information about Seth came to her through the search warrant on the prop truck that was October 27th of 2021. She told Seth she would need to get inside the safe on that prop truck, and instead of breaking open the safe, they asked someone to come on set with a code. That was Seth. She said he was extremely cooperative, brought her samples of live ammunition from the prop warehouse, and he gave her access to both his cell phone and his tablet. They didn't know, obviously, where the live ammunition on the set came from. During Hannah's second interview, the witness found out the ammunition supplied to the set of Rust came from 3 different sources. One of those sources was Seth. The other was an individual named Billy Ray with a prop company, and then Hannah herself. Hannah said she brought dummy rounds, ammunition, and gun belts. Hannah's dad said that he and Seth Kinney had been working on another set prior to this shooting in another state, and they had used live ammunition, which came back to New Mexico and potentially to the PDQ prop warehouse. That, along with Seth's admission he had used live ammunition, is why they decided to do that search warrant there at the prop warehouse. Another reason she decided to do the search warrant is information told to her by Hannah's attorney, Mr. Bowles. The beginning of the investigation, Mr. Bowles had made statements that he thought there was sabotage on set. None of the people that she interviewed thought it was sabotage or intentionally done to Hannah. Her attorney continuously talked about Seth, said he potentially provided that live ammunition, and that's another reason that they investigated him. She said Seth was completely cooperative with her for over a year. The reason she did not ask for DNA or fingerprint samples from Seth is during her investigation, there was just never any reason to believe Seth was on the set of Rust, and everything that had been brought to set had been picked up by someone else in Albuquerque, or they had met outside of the set. All of the ammunition they confiscated, which was sent to the FBI, it was determined it did not match the ammunition on set that was live, which is in line with what Hannah's dad told him about the type of ammunition that Seth had, which was what they used on that set prior to the shooting. The reason they did not confiscate cell phones from every person on set, she said it's just not what we do while we're investigating. If you witness a crime, law enforcement can't just come take your cell phone, put you in handcuffs, and put you in the back of a police car. Hannah did consent to law enforcement extracting her cell phone. With Baldwin's phone, she had applied for a search warrant in New Mexico, but he was located in New York at the time. So the DA's office and Mr. Baldwin's attorney ended up getting his phone with consent. They also did extractions of Mr. Hall and Sarah Zachary's cell phones with their consent. The reason the prop truck wasn't searched until October 27th is with the initial information they were given and what they responded to the day of the shooting, the entire incident in itself had occurred inside the church. So that was their primary area they were investigating. They were also processing additional information that they had received. And then that led to the prop cart that Hannah and the props team were using. She said, we didn't have the information in until later that this prop truck had been involved and the props department. So that's why that search warrant didn't take place until a few days later. The information she started receiving in terms of PDQ warehouse didn't come in until November 9th. Her interview with Thel Reed was November 17th. They were still receiving evidence, and she had another interview with Sarah. And she just explained she's involved in all of this stuff, and she's conducting these interviews herself. So November 30th was essentially the first day she had available to do a search warrant, and she requested it that morning and got it in the afternoon. She said investigations involving 100 witnesses, it takes time, and even ones that don't involve that many witnesses take time. The reason they did not test for latent prints and DNA on the ammunition found on set was during her interviews, the gun Alec Baldwin was using was taken from the church by Dave Halls. He had handed that gun to Hannah and directed Hannah to empty all the bullets from the gun. So in doing so, she touched all the rounds. And so the investigator knew Hannah's DNA and her fingerprints were going to be on those bullets. And also, Hannah wasn't the only one that touched that stuff. She got statements that the ammunition was handled by several different people after the shooting. Also, the gun belts that contained the live ammunition were said to have come from another set. The DA's office, as well as the FBI, they decided it just didn't make sense to test all that stuff. It wouldn't yield any results that would be useful. The reason they allowed the FBI to use the mallet on the gun was due to a statement that Alec Baldwin made where he said the gun just went off. They needed to disprove that statement, and that's why the FBI suggested doing the mallet test. They show a video on set, and if you're on YouTube, that's been playing for a few minutes, but she did have some brief discussion with Hannah before they left to go to the police station the day of the shooting. When the video starts, Hannah says she needs to use the restroom. She asked law enforcement to escort her there, and she said they take it as a precaution to accompany people into the restroom to ensure they don't harm themselves, they don't hide evidence or anything like that. As they're walking, Hannah says, I can't believe Alec Baldwin was holding the gun. That's so F. Hannah asked if there is a closer cop car they can put her in. She doesn't want her coworkers to see her. She said she feels really bad and she wants to get out of there and never show her face in the industry again. She said she's just effed up her entire career. Then she tells the investigator her dad is one of the best in the world when it comes to being an armorer. Ultimately, this investigator puts Hannah in her car. When they get back to the police station, Hannah said that she has talked to the movie's attorney and she thinks she should have an attorney there to represent her. They explained to her she can stop talking at any time, but Hannah said she was willing to answer some basic questions. Hannah says her job as an armorer is to check and load the guns and then hand those off to the actors. She's been handling guns her whole life. And that day, her and Sarah got the guns out and then went to set. She doesn't think Sarah worked with the Baldwin gun that day. Hannah said she dummied up the guns, which means putting those dummy rounds in. They asked where the guns are kept, and Hannah says the prop cart and the truck. She said the dummy rounds are in their own box, and then the guns are in the safe. The dummy rounds and all the ammo was left on that prop cart for lunch. She says not ammo. She corrects herself and says blanks. She said dummy rounds are put on the belts, and if the camera is looking right at the gun, she'll put a dummy in to make it look like it's loaded. Then she explains that blanks shoot powder. She said part of her job is to look in the barrel to make sure nothing is in it because that's how Brandon Lee was killed on set with a firearm. She said she definitely checked in the morning and was planning on checking again right after lunch. She had already started checking the other two guns. None of them had any barrel obstructions. She said she put the guns back in the safe before lunch, but the blanks and dummies were left on the cart. She said they didn't look tampered with when she got back and nothing looked out of the ordinary. Sarah took the guns after lunch out of the safe and then handed those to her. The investigator said she's worried because the blanks and the dummies were left out on the cart. She asked if there's a way someone could have altered them. Hannah said she's heard back in the day that dummies used to have a primer cap. She wonders if the bullet that struck Miss Hutchins and Joel was one of the older ones. Hannah said she shook all the rounds. She said the rounds were loaded before lunch and they had the gun the whole time before that. She said that the actors were not supposed to be pulling that hammer back. She explains that with COVID, they didn't like a bunch of people on set, so unless somebody was firing a gun, she was hardly allowed inside. She walked in that day and gave Alec the gun a couple of times, and he took it. At one point, she gave it to Dave Halls after lunch. He was sitting in on that shot. She thought that was fine, and then she walked out. She said that was the last shot before they would be working with blanks. Hannah explains blanks have ignition powder, dummies have none. They're just for looks. But no blanks were loaded that day. She said she was getting ready for that scene. She had her fanny pack full of the blanks. She loaded that gun with 5 dummy rounds before lunch. She said there was one that would not go in, so after lunch, she cleaned it out really quickly and put another dummy in there, leading to that being full with 6 rounds in the gun. She said she didn't check it too much after lunch because it was locked up during lunch, but she checked it and then put that last round in. The investigator asked about the fanny pack. Hannah says it has separate pockets. She can keep all the different types of ammunition separate. When the shooting occurred, she was outside by her cart about 15 to 20 feet away from the church. She was unable to see inside. And she explains the week before, what they call a puffer pop went off randomly. When she heard the gunshot, she thought it was a puffer pop. She said she had checked all the ammunition herself, and Sarah asked what was that. Hannah said it must be a popper. She heard somebody say medic and emergency. That was Jensen Ackles who shouted that. She looked in and saw Joel on the ground. She was like, "Is it the gun?" And Dave said, "Yeah, it was the effing gun." She walked in to try to see where the gun was to secure it. And she said that she got yelled at and just ran out. Dave brought her the gun and she opened it up and one of the dummies had somehow been discharged. She said she had never had a hot primer before, so that was odd to her. There in the police interview room, she's holding a round and explains that when a bullet shoots, the fire projects it. And then she shows a little piece that comes out. She called it a nipple. When she checked the gun, that part was gone. She saw the shell casing and it did not have that hole. They asked the difference between that and a blank. She kind of pats her body as if she's looking for one. She said the blank's very different. Nothing flies out of it. She picks up a projectile and says this is what was in the gun. She said those kind have primers, so they look real on the gun belts. They go back to her getting possession of the gun after the shooting. She said she put other rounds on the cart. They all had holes, but that one did not. The box of dummies may have had some wonky ones in there. And a week ago, they got some ammo from Seth. She said Seth borrowed them. That's what Sarah told her. She said Sarah called Seth that day. She doesn't know what was said because the police officer told Sarah to stop talking to Hannah. The investigator asked if something like that can be dysfunctional. Hannah said overall it's explosives and there's always a chance for safety to be compromised. And that's what I'm supposed to watch out for on set. She said she has heard of problems with blanks that have primers. And she wonders if this was one of the older ones, but it was supposed to stop when Brandon Lee was killed. She said Seth orders all their rounds. She explains he worked on The Walking Dead for 10 years. And other than her dad, he's the one that teaches her everything about being an armorer. She said nobody allows live ammo on set. And the investigator asked about their protocol on rust. She said you're supposed to check them every day. She has to know the load sizes, who's going to be in the proximity, are there going to be children or animals on set. You check for barrel obstructions because that's where a lot of mistakes get made, which is the blanks have something behind them. Guns get dropped in rocks and then a rock gets in the barrel and it flies out. So mostly just checking the barrel and making sure that the dummies are actually dummies. She talks about shaking all the rounds, and the prosecution stops the video and asked if the live round would have made a sound when it was shaken. The investigator says no, and also none of those had holes in the side, which should have been a red flag. The prosecutor also points out later on that Hannah says she always shook the projectiles most of the time. She said 7 guns were pulled out after lunch. She explains which characters had what. She said it's mind-boggling to her that both of them got shot. She only heard one shot. Hannah said she thinks it went through one and hit the other. She said that's insane. She doesn't know Dave Hall's last name at this point and said it's on the call sheet. Then she rattles off the names of people she knew were in the church. Hannah said she was parked behind the church near the black tent, and the tent is where everybody would hang out. They show her a photo, and they say they want to see if this is something that would have come out of one of the rounds. Hannah looks and says it looks like something that would be in a blank. The prosecution stops the video and asks the investigator if a blank looks anything like a real projectile, and she says no. They tell Hannah they pulled this out of the shoulder. Hannah says, oh my God, poor Helena. The investigator said that's why they're thinking it could be a live round at this point. Hannah says, really? She's asked if it looks like it could have been a live round to her. Hannah grabs a round from the table and said if she had her extractor, she could check. Hannah looks at the phone of the photo of the projectile that was taken from Joel's shoulder and says, see, look at that line. It's kind of a distinct thing. And she thinks that it's a dummy round. She says it might be a regular live round, though. And the investigator said, well, that's what they're thinking. And Hannah says, holy F. She said nothing was out of the ordinary that morning other than the camera crew quitting. And she doesn't think any of them would do that. She said there was bickering with the camera crew and other crew members. And she says getting a 45 round is super hard right now due to COVID. And also they were really behind with production at this point. She said nobody had issues with Joel or Miss Hutchins. She says she doesn't know much about Miss Hutchins and said that she definitely is a strong personality. That's all. She can't believe this is the last thing for this to happen since the Crow. This is my own worst effing nightmare. The investigator says, I think they're good right now. And I'm thinking maybe she's referring to the 2 victims. Hannah says she thinks there was bad rounds in that box. The investigator says a couple of bad rounds because those people did get shot. Hannah corrects her and said there was 1 bullet. She heard 1 pop. So it must have went through Joel and somehow hit Helena. Hannah says she's flabbergasted by this and she can't imagine how this happened, but she only heard 1 shot. After the shooting, she opened the gun, checked the rest of the rounds in there. Only 1 was gone. The rest were dummies. She said they all vary a bit in how they look. Hannah talks about the camera crew walking again. She didn't know much about it, just that they had quit the night before. She said they bickered a lot, to be honest. There was just some animosity. She said it's almost unpleasant to be inside because the atmosphere was so toxic. She tried to stay outside and definitely was on the sides watching. She said they weren't supposed to be pulling that hammer back on the gun. It was just supposed to be seen in that shot as he goes in to grab it from the holster. She said when there's gunfire, she stands right by, but she's not usually directly inside the room because they don't find it necessary. The investigator says you're not supposed to pull the hammer back, but it's a prop gun. And Hannah says, no, it's a real gun. She said she wishes she had checked it more. She's asked if when the round wouldn't load and she cleaned it, that seemed odd to her. And she said, no, it's been dropped a lot in the dirt. She said maybe a little gunky, but she cleaned it. The investigator asked if Hannah thinks it could have been the round itself. She said, I don't think so. These are dummies. They slide out a little easier, but she just doesn't think that's it. She says sometimes they do get stuck because the guns are a little dirty, but everything else seemed normal with the rounds. She said, I thought today was going to be a super great day. They were done shooting after this, and it was going to be smooth sailing from then on. The investigator asked if she knows where the round from the photo she showed Hannah came from, and Hannah doesn't remember if they were from the box or from on top of the cart. She said they're all out of the boxes, really, and it could have been from the top of the cart. Hannah says she checks every single round as she's loading it. She said if it didn't rattle, she wouldn't have put it in. The investigator asked if she heard the rattle. She said she did. She checked all 6. The state points out Hannah said one of the rounds had the hole, therefore she would not have heard a rattle with that 1 projectile. The investigator keeps going back to the crew walking off, and Hannah says she feels this was just an effed up accident. She doesn't think anybody on that set is malicious. And then they ask how long she's known Sarah. She says Sarah's the nicest little Christian girl ever. The investigators leave the room. Hannah is looking at her phone. They come back and ask if she has anything else to add. They ask if when the gun was handed back to her, if it had already been opened or if she did all the manipulating herself. She said she did, and the gun was closed when it was handed to her. At the end of the day, yesterday, they get into that second interview where her attorney's present. We're going to get into that. I didn't want to break that interview up. It's about a 3-hour video. I think a lot of today is going to be that video, at least the first half. And so we'll see who else testifies, but hoping to get that second episode out today. A little hard with the time difference and then just me having to run and do errands for my grandmother or pick up my kid from school. So if I don't put an episode out, you know it's coming. That's it. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Wednesday. We will see you later.